This is a summary of the horrific and terrible financial fraud committed against 3 innocent siblings of a cancer patient who worked for Yehuda Ferris and his wife for decades in Berkeley. These 3 beneficiaries of their late brother's trust were entitled to ownership of some of their brother's property or a lien on the property for a given amount of money at 10% interest a year until paid in full. And they now, 5 years later, are living in dire poverty. The Ferrises continue to live in their $6 million 5-bedroom house by the Claremont Hotel. They purchased a $2 million building they use for their empty synagogue at 1710 University Avenue, and it's 2 blocks away from the late cancer patient's property, where he owned half of a $2 million property at 1810 Grant Street. Now, this is a vicious story, and these people have no place in the Jewish community, and the facts speak for themselves. This is not slander. This is not speculation. This is absolute facts, and they could be found in the trial record, in the court record. Public access. You can go to the e-portal, the Alameda County e-portal web domain, and you could look up a probate case called pt.1 20163, and all the facts will be there. And I'm just repeating facts, not lies, not slander, not fiction, but actual facts. And where does this story begin? There was a man, Levi Yochanan, who worked for the Ferrises for about 30 years. He's a physical labor. He built houses, he remodeled houses, he painted houses. He was the unheard of Carl Cardell of Berkeley. He worked for the Ferrises for many, many years. And suddenly in 2014, he comes down with 6 months to live. 100 doctors said to his brother, an EMT, when his brother heard his brother had 6 months to live, he called up 100 doctors and 100 nurses and read 100 medical journals, and they all said 6 months. So the brother decided to become his brother's caregiver because he statistically only had 6 months. The cancer patient ended up living 6 years. But in those 6 years, his own non-Jewish Filipino daughters, Maxine and Flora Ziprin, who attended synagogue with him at the Ferris Synagogue over on College Avenue years before, they never spoke to their father, Levi Yochanan, in the entire 6 years before he died. I mean, what kind of sadistic cruelty is that? It kills cancer patients when they're abandoned by their own children. That's in the literature too. So they just confessed in court on August 19th in case number RP221-20163 that all the allegations against them that they never saw their father is true. They confessed under penalty of perjury. There's letters from one of the daughters saying, well, I hope you don't die with regret, but I'm not going to see you before you die. That's just how I have to go about it. So they drove him to the grave. Now, he had lived with the Filipino woman at 1810 Grant Street for 30, 40 years, raised the daughters. He left the house in 2011. In 2014, he was given 6 months to live, every 6 months for 6 years. Now, an attorney appeared out of nowhere, and I believe this is one of Yehuda Ferris's attorneys who planted this guy. It's my personal opinion, based on more facts. So the man never got it together to get an attorney to kick his ex-girlfriend out, even though he was dying. Suddenly, a year before he died, he got back in the house with the help of an attorney. And that attorney got him back in the house, And since his brother was taking care of him, his brother, who's an EMT and phlebotomist for 20 years, was taking care of him. Well, what do you mean taking care of him? Taking the vital signs 3 times a day, making sure the medicine is right, on time, calling the doctors, sitting at the hospital 24/7 whenever he was hospitalized, so he wouldn't be put in a nursing home, cooking, cleaning, socializing, driving. He wasn't allowed to drive for the last 6 months. So the man's brother gave up his life to help his brother, because statistically it was only 6 months, and then it was a year, then it was a year and a half, then it was 6 years, right? So the guy is a statistical anomaly, okay? And he lived a long time. He comes from 7 generations of rabbis in Israel. Famous mystical lineage. And this Yehuda Ferris, who comes from a Reform family, as his wife comes from a Reform family, they stole his property and his money after he died and didn't give it to the siblings. That's a fact. You can call it slander. It's not slander. Just look it up in the case file, okay? It's a fact, okay? Now, getting back to the facts, he gets in the house a year before he dies. He invites his brother to stay with him because wherever he went, his brother went. So they move in. The man proceeds to be hospitalized 7 times. A total of 115 days in the hospital. Who was at the hospital 24/7 whenever he was out? His brother, right? So he wouldn't go put in a nursing home, which is where people with advanced cancer that don't die in 6 months end up in nursing homes. It didn't happen because the brother stopped it. Now the brother had to give up his jobs and his career plans because he had to do bedside care. He had to watch his brother, the patient, because he's an EMT, and make sure his lips didn't turn blue, make sure he didn't stop breathing, make sure he didn't, anything wrong, boom, he'd call 911, take him to the hospital. He couldn't leave his brother's side and go to work 8 hours a day. He'd come back, he might not have a brother. Now, for the record, for the first 5 years before he got back in his house, he was living in a dust-filled basement over on Bowdwitch Street above Telegraph Avenue, over by Willard Park, Ho Chi Minh Park was the old name of it, right? There's a woman named Barbara, that alcoholic woman that he used to work for. He used to live in a dust-filled, musty, damp, rain-filled basement that flooded when it rained. He slept on a filthy black foam mattress, rat feces everywhere, dust balls the size of baseballs. Yehuda and Miriam Ferris, living in a $6 million mansion by the Claremont Hotel, $6 million 5-bedroom mansion. She is an heiress to hundreds of millions in real estate. She brags about it to everyone. Whenever the daughters of the sons come, I say, oh, my mom owns this real estate. Yeah, her brother runs a company out of Detroit. She brags about it herself all the time. But when the man that worked for them like a slave out of Egypt for 20 years gets 6 months to live, they couldn't find him a nice room somewhere and say, okay, you only got 3 months to live, so you're going to live in luxury those 3 months. No, they didn't. They let him spend 5 out of 6 years in a filthy, rat-infested basement, and his brother saw it all, okay? Then a year before he dies, he gets back in the house. He goes to pick up all his stuff. He says, where we're going, brother? Oh, we're going to that place where I used to live. The brother goes in there and he sees rat feces everywhere, dust balls, the biggest baseballs. It's musty, it's damp, the rain's coming in. It's a horrible, horrible place to live. But that's where he lived for 6 years because the Ferrises didn't have the common decency to give him a better place to live. And this man is royalty. This man is a descendant of 7 generations of rabbis in Israel, from Safad Israel, and the Ferrises are Reform born. Even Label Ferris goes on Facebook and says, my grandparents weren't religious. Well, that's the Ferrises' parents, right? I don't think they're Jewish based on their actions. I mean, you got a lot of evil Jews, so they could be, but most likely not. So, moving right along to the facts. He finally passes away in January of 2020 in ICU. He had been in the house a year. The brother had been living with him for a year. Then 2 weeks later, COVID shuts the entire globe down with trying to slow down the virus. Everybody's on quarantine. So the brother's stuck in the house. the trustee's Muslim lawyer named Will Rogers now suddenly, in the blink of an eye, became the attorney for Yehuda Ferris. If he didn't even know the guy, why did he hire him in 5 seconds? He probably was a plant from the beginning, because he's been defending him like a dog ever since against everything. I think Will Rogers out of Petaluma claims to be a lawyer for 30 years, but he has no website, no reviews in 30 years. Is he a lawyer? You tell me. I don't think so. But he claims to be, right? Maybe the real Will Rogers got killed and he's just used, it could be identity theft. It happens all the time. So what I'm saying is, this guy becomes his lawyer, and then he sends out a notice of trust to the man's 3 siblings. And it says $30,000 each, plus 10% interest a year. Every year you don't get it. And if you don't get it in 9 months, the 30 grand, it'll become a interest-bearing lien on the property until paid in full at 10% interest a year. And it's an irrevocable trust, meaning it cannot be changed. Cannot be changed. So what happens? The siblings say, wait a second, we were supposed to get part ownership of the house. What is this $30,000? The date on the trust is 4 months before the man passed away, after he was hospitalized 4 times in liver coma 3 weeks at a time, in the hospital, unconscious. The brother eyewitnessed it because he was at the hospital 24/7 anytime he went in. So liver coma 3 weeks, goes home a few weeks, another liver coma in the hospital, unconscious 3 weeks, goes home, another 3 weeks in the hospital, liver coma, goes home, another 3 weeks in the hospital, liver coma, and then he wrote this trust. He wasn't even allowed to drive. He didn't know where he was, couldn't keep his eyes open, but he supposedly wrote a new trust. Now, the terms of the trust specifically say, if this trust is amended, if this is an amended trust, then you present the original trust along with the second trust. They didn't do it. In other words, in plain English, if somebody writes a trust and then they amend it, which is what it was, an amended trust, because the brother found the original trust in the house after he passed away. Much later, he found the original trust, which is almost identical to the first trust. The first trust says give the 3 siblings 25% ownership of the man's half ownership of a $2 million house. And then the second trust is almost identical, but it says, no, give them $30,000 each, plus 10% interest a year that they don't get it. And it says, if this is an amended trust, you will present the amended trust along with the original trust to the beneficiaries, so they will be well aware that that this is an amended trust. The trustee didn't do that. He just gave them the second trust and said, yeah, this is the second trust. And in the second trust, guess what? Will Rogers gets $40,000. The first trust was black and white. It said 25% for my absent daughter, non-Jewish daughter who never saw me in 6 years of cancer, never even called, never. They were too busy making $100,000 a year as occupational therapists. One's working at UCLA and the other one was working at Arts Middle School in Berkeley. Now she claims to be living in Washington, D.C. I don't know where she's living. She's not even a human. She's a demon. She doesn't live anywhere. So, nevertheless, they were making $100,000 a year and they couldn't give a penny to their father. They couldn't donate a meal, a bowl of chicken soup, a hug, a Hanukkah card, nothing, not even a phone call. They just admitted in open court on August 19th, they did nothing. They never spoke to him. There's letters filed in the court that say, well, sorry, Dad, I'm not going to see you before you die. I hope you don't die with regret, but that's just how I have to go about it. I mean, evil, vicious, disgusting, right? So, nevertheless, the man's first trust, written a year before he died, says 25% for daughter 1, 25% for daughter 2, 25% for the 3 siblings, and 25% for Ferris, the trustee. No, 12% for him and 12% for Gabriella Grossman, another 90-year-old former Kaiser therapist, right? Now, Then the amended trust, now they're both written by the same lawyer. They got them in the house. That is probably a ferris plant. The second trust says 25% for daughter 1, 25% for daughter 2. From the remaining 50%, give each sibling 30 grand. Give Ferris 40 grand. And give like 20 grand to this Gabriella Grossman lady. And then it says, Ferris, the trustee, will pay the attorney $40,000, will pay all attorney's fees, will come out of the $40,000. And whatever's left over will be what Ferris can keep himself. So in other words, Will Rogers wrote himself into the trust as a beneficiary, because now the amended trust says, well, give Ferris 40 grand and he'll use that for burial expenses and attorney's fees, and whatever's left over, he'll keep for himself. So the attorney, opportunistic predator, financial, frankly, wrote himself into the trust as a beneficiary. And so the trustee's a beneficiary, and now his lawyer is also a beneficiary. So what happens next? They present that trust to the beneficiaries, but they never followed the law that says if it's an amended trust, you're supposed to supply the first trust along with the second trust when you present it. So the beneficiaries will say, okay, here's the trust, but here's the first trust, well, here's the second trust. That's the law. And that's what it says in the trust. It says you shall present an amended version with the amended version. When you present the amended version, you shall present the first trust. Well, they never did. So then later, the brother finds the original trust in the house much, much later. However, during that time, they turn around and the brother's been living at the house for years now. The trustee went to the court in November of 2022, almost 2 years after the man died, and said, hey, judge, we don't know what to do because the Filipino girlfriend who owns the other half of the house, the mother of the children, and the children want to kick the brother out, but it's the middle of the COVID pandemic, and there's an eviction moratorium in full effect, and millions of people are dying across the world. And plus, he's a nice guy. He took care of his brother. We don't want to remove him. We don't want to evict him. So, Judge, we would never do anything without this honorable court's permission, because we wouldn't want to have the appearance of being prejudiced of one beneficiary over the other. So, Judge, tell us what to do. So instead of waiting for an answer from the judge, they turned around and threatened the man in May of 2022 with a letter that you can find on this channel, and said, well, I know it's the middle of COVID pandemic and 250,000 people died in 2022, but hey, Mr. Brother, you're 63 and a half. Your brother just died of terminal cancer after 6 years, but you better evacuate the house. You better self-evict in 2 months, or we're going to charge you 2.5 years rent, and you're never going to get a penny of your inheritance because it'll all be stolen from you for attorney's fees. So get the hell out and accept this offer. But there was no dollar amount on the offer. So when they called, and he said, well, the brother said, well, how much are you offering? The attorney, Will Rogers, if he is an attorney, he says, well, less than 20. He was like having a breathing spasm. Less than 20. Garbled speech, right? And the man said, excuse me, what do you mean less than 20? It's 30,000 plus 10% interest a year. It's 2.5 years later. That's 40,000 each. And you're talking about less than 20. You didn't say less than $20. You just say less than 20. But less than 20 what? And instead of answering and giving us something in writing, next thing you know, guess what? Yehuda Ferris and his wife sell the $1 million worth of real estate for $82,000. $82,000, but the whole house is worth $2 million. So the late cancer patient's trust owned $1 million worth of real estate that the late cancer patient worked with his blood, sweat, and tears for 35 years with his hands, hard labor, building property, fixing property to pay the mortgage. And Yehuda Ferris sells it for $82,000. And guess who he sells it to? The two people on earth that are not allowed to get it. The irrevocable trust says that the absent daughters who never saw their father in 6 years, and they just confessed